Well, the gut is entirely well adapted. In the stomach, it's acid, and we need that for our digestion. In the small intestine, the balance of acid-base is extremely well controlled by the body and tends to be around neutral, and we can't change it very much by diet. Okay, yes, fire was invented much earlier, and fire that was invented much earlier was probably mainly used for warmth and defence. There's not much evidence. There might have been accidental heating of food, but the good evidence for cooking comes from around about 400,000 years ago. So that's about it. What was your other question? Oh, okay. This is extremely interesting. The enlargement of the brain and the shrinking to some extent of the gut came before cooking. So the non-thermal preparation of food, which we have records of going back about 2.5 million years, was probably pretty important. Now, non-thermal preparation included pounding and grinding and that type of preparation. So that was probably pretty important.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And look, a number of papers have come out, and one's really convincing actually recently, and people will have heard about it, concerning Parkinson's disease.
Right.
So you will have heard about that in the mainstream media as well. And I think that's really exciting. Sarkis Mazmanian, who's a giant in the field of microbiome, and he's done work in autism as well. He's got Parkinson's model mice, so they're highly expressing the alpha-synuclein protein, and he's put some, raised them in a germ-free environment and some in regular facilities, and donated some faecal matter from people with Parkinson's and people without, and shown that the symptoms get worse when they receive the faecal matter from the Parkinson's patients. So, I mean, that's amazing, and there's more work needed to be done there, but I think that's very, very interesting.
Amy, do you want to comment on that mental, physical thing?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a component to many, many disorders, and that number and breadth is just increasing. Not just mental disorders, but physical disorders are increasingly being linked to the gut. But I don't think we should forget that all the neurobiological research we've done over several decades still holds true. You know, there is still a brain component. We can't forget that. Mental health is as much brain as it is gut. I think we shouldn't jump too quickly to forgetting the brain either.
Shouldn't. John, comment on that one.
I can comment very quickly. So there are many disorders which are thought to be or typified as brain disorders which have a gut component. So around 90% of people with advanced Parkinson's disease have gut disorders. A high proportion of people with multiple sclerosis have gut disorders. A high proportion of people with prion infection have gut disorders.
I think the really interesting questions are about how do these things happen. So we are looking for targets, for example, in the gut where we can maybe change those contractions that you saw, restore them back to the regular type of contractions that the normal mice have. And by adding the drugs, we know they act on specific receptors, so we can then start to think about targeting those. I think as a field, the field is moving towards understanding what a healthy microbiome is, and we really just don't know what that is at the moment. And everyone, whatever their favourite disease is thinking about what's different of the microbiome compared to a healthy microbiome, but we're really all working together at the moment to try and figure that out. Yeah, tricky question. So that's why I work in mice, okay, because there are lots of environmental factors that we know can alter the microbiome. I mean, you guys will know that. The household that you live in, you're all going to have similar microbiomes, okay? Gross. The medication that you might take, the diet that you're eating. So these things are already changing microbiome. So it might be a correlation, but that's as far as I know that we can go with that. Yes, diagnosis, awareness is increasing. People are looking more in autism, they're looking more in girls now, and they're finding that actually, even though we thought it was 5-to-1 boys to girls with autism, now it's more likely that the girls are masking their diagnostic traits. So there are going to be more diagnoses, but not necessarily for reasons that are necessarily environmental. I'm going to answer that one straight away. No, that's absolutely not true. And so much money and so many studies have been spent to carefully check again whether there was a link. There's absolutely no link.
Okay.
So parents can relax.
Thank you.
From animal studies, it's clear that if you eliminate the gut bacteria early on,
Yep.
then you suffer from reduced gut health for your life. In Australia, a high proportion of children are given antibiotics, at least 2 courses, in their first 6 months of life. And they're usually given it for otitis media, unnecessarily quite often. And it's very likely that humans will react to large antibiotic doses in the same way as children, as animals. So it's pretty likely that these huge doses of antibiotics given to children in Australia
Right.
are having bad effects on gut health.
Right, but I can improve it by eating the old chestnut of diet and exercise. That's going to help my microbiome.
Maybe a little bit.
Maybe.
You know, of course you're going to be better off if you look after your diet and your exercise. But if you jeopardise your gut health sufficiently, you may be able to pull it back, but you probably won't pull it back to where it ought to be.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask actually, just to see, John, what he thought. Antibiotics early in life is a different case scenario than possibly some antibiotics later in life when the body, when the microbiome is more set, because I think it's more changeable up until approximately 2 years of age in humans.
Let me tell you a little bit of the science, not much, but a little bit. As we develop early in life, the gut is unusual because it leaks. And that leakage is important because what it leaks are things that are in the diet and are in the gut, and that contributes to the development of immune tolerance and the maturation of the immune system. If you wipe out everything with antibiotics, then it's very likely that you are going to be more prone to diseases that involve changes in immune status.
Right. So
And
that's
they are increasing in our society, as you probably know.
So that's the inflammation connection.
I think the best evidence we've got so far is for a high fibre diet. There are lots of special diets out there that people swear by, but I think the best evidence is for that, particularly for microbiota accessible carbohydrates, which are most vegetables. Asparagus is particularly high for some reason, leek, there are some other things, but yeah.
Yeah, so eat green things.
It's what we always knew to be good for us, really. Unfortunately, yeah, no miracle cure.
But it's also avoiding certain things.
They're undoubtedly going to have
Yep.
any diet change will have an impact on the microbiome. I don't think yet we know whether it's a good one or a bad one. There's enough evidence of, I think, the ills of sugar and high amounts of sugar and highly processed food in the diet to suggest that it's not a good thing, but as to why and what the microbiome mechanisms of that is, I'm not particularly familiar with them.
I would just say something very quickly, and that is just about the ketogenic diet, and I think the modified Atkins diet that are being used to treat some forms of epilepsy. These are really valuable in that respect, but at the same time they will change the microbiome, but it's very important to use those treatments if they're effective for those disorders.
With other treatments, is it what you're saying? So it's not diet
Yep.
alone.
So really, I think the picture is really just starting to be formed, and we don't really have that information yet, and it might differ for different diseases. We don't even know what the ideal healthy microbiome is yet, which is all of the combination of bacteria and fungi interacting together. So it's really complex. These are communities, and so we haven't really worked that out, and what's right for your genetic background as well, for example.
That has been tried and it's been experimented with, yes.
And he got close, but not really close, and then it just re-established itself, I believe. when he got
He
back.
imported Malawian poo to the United States to do that.
Yes! No, I don't know.
Restricted caloric intakes. That's a classic experiment, wasn't it? It was done on mice. John, tell me more about it.
Well, I mean, it's true in animals, it's reproducible, and epidemiological studies in humans suggest the same. That people, if you turn it the other way,
Okay.
people who are obese have shorter lives.
Yeah.
Epidemiologically, the diets associated with lower rates of Alzheimer's disease have a lower meat consumption. But I don't know if we know that's because of microbiota change or some other mechanism.
Well, I think John touched on that in one of his answers earlier, saying that, you know, the gut leaks in our early development, and so the immune system needs exposure to these bacteria to, you know, become fully functional, and so altering that early developmental phase would, likely, definitely have effects on the immune system. And experiments being done, as John said, that have shown that.
It's quite likely that'll happen in the future. We're not ready for it yet because we don't know how to relate the information.
No. There are companies that are doing it
You
that
can do
will
it, yeah,
sequence
exactly.
your microbiota for you and give you some sort of profile of how you relate to the rest of the population and what that might predispose you towards, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend them because I don't think we're there yet with the science.
Oh, okay. Because so internet companies, you can send your little samples to.
You have to pay money though, remember? You have to pay a lot of money.
Do you really? Oh, is
Yeah.
it like that ancestry DNA thing? You've got to pay a lot of money there too.
It's getting cheaper and cheaper though, so
right.
there could be futuristic toilets that will do it for you, and then we'll, you know, maybe talk to your fridge and tell you what you should buy more of, or, you know, I wouldn't put it past the future.
Right. And there'll be an app for that, no?
Of course, yeah.
That's a great question. Some of the experiments that are being done are trying to use exercise for treatment to, say, you know, glucose intolerance and things like that, and it does change the microbiome, exercise itself. So whether that goes in the right direction, because of course we don't have all the information yet, or not, we don't know, but exercise does also influence the
It
microbiome.
changes motility as well, so
It changes what, sorry?
motility and digestion.
Don't long distance runners or sprinters or somebody have like problems?
Yes, I think if you do too much of it, it's always going to be a bad thing.
I don't think we can put all the links together, but what we can say that if you change your diet severely, that means so that you can get a big enough change to make a scientific measurement, then you do change the person's epigenetics, and that can be passed on to at least 2 generations. And we can give an example of that. That is, the progeny of obese parents have changes that are epigenetic changes that cause their children and even their grandchildren to have a propensity towards obesity. So if you are an obese parent, your children are doubly cursed because they suffer from your environment and they suffer from the way you pass on your genes.
Probiotics, in theory, are live bacteria that hopefully get down to your gut and help colonise, but there is limited evidence, I think, that they do colonise, at least in pill form, whereas prebiotics are substances that feed bacteria in a beneficial, so-called beneficial way, so those high-fibre foods that I mentioned before are considered to be prebiotic.
Well, the major colonisation is through birth, and it comes from the perineum of the mother.
Right.
If the child is born by caesarean section, of course you don't get that, and the colonisation is from the atmosphere, from accidental contact with other people and so on.
There was a recent study though showing that C-section babies by 6 months or so, their gut bacteria is indifferentiable from those born at least with the technology we've got at the moment to see
There's things in both directions. There's data in both directions.
Can I just make a comment on that? So for Clostridium difficile infections, where patients, that affects thousands and thousands of patients in the US alone, fecal transplant is extremely effective, and it's successful somewhere like 90%, over 90% of cases. But this is in the circumstance when the patient would otherwise die from chronic diarrhoea, and they're given a dose of antibiotics to remove all of the microbiome, and then they're given a fecal transplant from a healthy donor. And that's the only, as far as I know, it's still the case that this is the only disease where fecal transplant is approved as a treatment, but there are other small studies looking at other diseases and getting interesting results.
Mostly bowel diseases at this stage that I know of, not yet mental illnesses. Is that right? I mean, apart from research studies in terms of clinical.
People with inflammatory bowel diseases do have a different microbiome. That's true. What FODMAPs does is not absolutely clear, because there are two things happening. The microbiome does change, but in particular, the levels of butyrate that are produced go up considerably. And butyrate, for some reason we don't fully understand, has a protective role.
I just wanted to bring up this really great paper that I read the other day, which is about how the host genetics can modify the microbiome. And so this is another way of looking at it where perhaps our genetics ourselves can alter from our gut cells, can modify or kill off some bacteria and give us our different microbial signatures. And that's somewhere that we really should be investigating as well to look at mechanisms, I think. Well, I guess you can relate that to circadian rhythms, and we know that our gut function is different at different times of the day, and so there may be effects, but
Don't think there's any direct study measuring that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's related to vitamin D as well.
that's just a great question. So another thing that's associated with autism it could also be part of the diagnostic criteria is sensory changes, and so that includes sense of taste. And so we know that pretty much everyone on the autism spectrum are fussy eaters. That could be for a number of reasons. It could be due to gut function. As far as I know, that hasn't been studied in relation to genes and eating habits. And I certainly haven't been involved in that kind of study, but I think it's a great question with a lot of things going on, and it's very difficult to prove a connection. And which happens first, chicken and egg, is something we're always dealing with. Is it the gene mutation that you might have that's altering all these things, or is it because you were fine and then something else happened in the environment? We don't know.
Well, I'd like to take a tangent on that, because what I'd like to emphasise is that gut health is related to many organs in the body. And if you have poor gut health, then you end up affecting other organs, and poor gut health leads to poor liver health. All the blood that drains from the gastrointestinal tract goes to the liver, because that's where the nutrients are processed. The gut talks very closely to the pancreas. So gut health is linked to whole body health, the health of other organs as well. In fact, gut health relates to what's called a metabolic syndrome, where the whole of the body shuts down.
I think the inverse is also true. So while we should be looking after our gut health for sure, for all of those reasons, connects with almost every organ in the body, we shouldn't neglect mental health because there's clearly a downstream effect as well. So you can, have very good physical health practices, but if you're not taking care of your stress levels and your mood and your mental health, then you're only doing half the job really.
So I think I'd like to go back to those connections between the neurons, and of course we know that that's going to interact with your microbes as well. But when we think about brain disorders, mutations that are changing the way the brain wiring is occurring, those mutations and those changes in our central nervous system are probably changing our gut as well. And so I think we should start thinking more and more along those lines. It's not just affecting our brain in isolation. And therefore, this brain-gut axis is really, really important.
I found tonight fascinating. Please give our panel